So hello there and welcome back. I'm not in my studio today, as you can tell. I'm in my girlfriend's place. I'm painting a portrait of her mother, Miss Maria Colleen. So on my palette here I have titanium white, burnt umber, alizarin permanent, cadmium red, cadmium yellow, yellow ochre, sap green, ultramarine blue, and ivory black. In today's episode it's going to be a little bit more about how to kind of weather the elements in terms of painting a portrait at home when we don't have access to the usual studio equipment, but we are going to use an LED light. I'll have information on that in the description box down below, as well as the easel that I'm using, though this easel is a little bit more on the pricey side, but any old studio easel will do as long as you have a handheld palette. It's not that important that you have a heavy-duty easel, but I will write down what this is in the description box down below just because it is pretty helpful. By the way, we just started the timer. We're going to do a timer for 20 minutes each pose. I have my palette below, so you're not really going to see the paint mixtures. I will lift up the palette once in a while, so you should be able to see this much, right? So as far as the setting up the model, I'm going to have her in a standard seated position. So when you're setting up the model, make sure that the model is not staring directly at your light source, especially if your light source is an LED light. And you also want to make sure that your model is either centered, three-quartered, or in profile. Make sure that the model is not kind of three-quarter or kind of profile, because that will also make posing a little bit difficult and resetting a pose a little bit difficult. So with just a little bit of mineral spirits, and I'm kind of just taking some of it off on the paper towel, I'm going to use burnt umber, as you know, and I'm going to do the umber drawing. I am aware that the light is coming from this direction and it's probably bouncing there and creating a glare, so if it glares too much I'll just move the camera to the other side. I haven't decided yet about the photo reference for this pose. Since I am working from life, it wouldn't be fair to give you the photo reference, but I do know that a lot of you like to paint along with these episodes, so I'll ask the model in between the breaks if we can have a photo reference for the Facebook photo reference group. So if I can use the photo reference to give you, you'll probably see it in the corner of the screen at some point. So now I have just an indication, as you know, of the placement of the head. This is going to be a standard portrait, so I'm not that concerned about any kind of overly complex elements in the composition. It's just a standard head. Shoulders are at an angle, as you're seeing over here. When you're working from life, you want to work very, very quick, very effective, especially in the portrait painting groups where you have to pay the model to sit there for you. That's not the case here because we're, talking about painting at home. So be quick, be efficient, deliberate. So this is what I'm doing, just simple straight lines and angles. Now I know where the model's head is going to fit, and if you're new to this channel and you don't know why, I put in the mineral spirits and the burnt umber, and I'm using the burnt umber to draw with. This is the typical old umber sketch. So this means that it's allowing the paint to move very fluid, but at the same time it's not dripping down the canvas. It's very malleable, easy to work with, something like your good old vine charcoal would be. So I have an angle here between the ears, though I can barely see this one. I just want to make sure that the head is not too awkwardly placed in the composition. Now I don't think it's too awkwardly placed. Can you turn back this way? Okay. Might be too much. A little bit this way. Okay, cool. There. So like I was saying before, it's normal for models to move. Trust me, you would never catch me posing at all. But the thing is, you want to make sure that you know where your center line is. Like I said, I chose a three-quarter. A little more this way. Okay, good. So I chose a three-quarter angle with Miss Maria Colleen. So that means that you're seeing the center line roughly here at the three-quarter area. Now with the umber sketch, you can use a dry bristle brush to move the paint around. So that's what I'm doing here. If it starts to stick onto the surface, that's okay, that's not a problem. That's likely going to happen here. That just means that the paint is starting to settle into the surface and it's time to move faster. So here we have a little indication of the eye socket on one side. And I'm aiming to work at this, or on this portrait, for about 2 days, 2-3 hour sessions. Hopefully, if that's not the case, then you'll know why it's a little more loose and sketchy. But this is how I start pretty much almost every single painting that I'm going to work on for multiple days. I'm just a little more careful with the drawing in the beginning. Though I do emphasize a little bit more freedom and versatility when you're working from life and from a live model in your own home. So there's a little shadow shape for the nose. Very simple little rectangular looking shape, and now following the nose all the way down, I'm going to get to the mouth. Now keep in mind, in the beginning of a portrait, things are going to be messy and things are going to be quite scary to look at, and that's okay. In particular, this situation that I'm in is the most difficult I think any portrait painter can be in. Now when you're painting a loved one, you know, that's difficult, right? But when you're painting the mother of a loved one, that's hell. It's probably the most difficult situation you can find yourself in, because you can really, really go wrong. So that's why I advise you to be loose with it in the beginning, because it's very easy to get too timid. So rather than start off timid, we want to start off bold. And since this is live talking, so I am painting as I'm talking, which is kind of interesting here. There will be longer moments in the footage where I won't be talking as much. You may hear some background noise. There are 2 birds behind me. There's a cat and then 2 dogs running around, so just excuse any noise that you will hear throughout the episode. And if you're painting along with me at home, don't forget to check out the Facebook photo reference group. Now I have the angle of the eyes. This is a very important telltale sign of the pose. So now the head is kind of drifted in this position, which is something I kind of like. So remember, when you're working from life, you have options, much more than working from a picture. And it's an interactive experience, both for you and for the model. So in the beginning, like this is really the time to get to know the model. It's not every day that you stare at anything for this amount of time. So especially if you're new to portrait painting, don't chase the pose so much in the beginning. The model will settle into their more relaxed, more natural resting position, and that's what you want. I'm going to fill in a little bit of the dark for the hair, and then I'm going to get into the cast shadow down here, and then the form shadow on the face. And for all of those new to this channel, cast shadow is a shadow that is casted from something, therefore it's a shadow on the neck. Form shadow is a shadow that's resting on the form, therefore the side here of the concavity of the eye socket, or the side of the eye socket, that's what that is, excuse me, side of the forehead. You want to keep things very simple and very abstract. And linen, I think linen is my favorite type of surface to work on. This is just an old 12 by 16. Is this 12 by 16? I think this is 11 by 14. So if I said 12/16 in the beginning, whoops. But anyway, this is an old linen canvas that I had sitting around and I just randomly found it before I came over and decided, hey, might as well use it. Especially when you're painting from life. I mean, there's nothing more difficult in painting but exhilarating than painting from life. I tell you, my very first portrait painting, not that it matters, my very first portrait painting was a painting of my mother when I was in high school. She really didn't like it, so the painting didn't live that long, but that was my initial experience to this whole thing. And I was kind of hooked onto this ever since then. Just really enjoy the challenge. And there's the side of the neck. I'm going to have to reassess the angle between the shoulders in a little while. Now there's a little element of jewelry. Even though we didn't get to any of the colors yet, I think it's a good idea just to put an indication for where the jewelry will fit, even though I'm probably going to paint over this as long as I have a clue of where it's going to fit later. That's all that really matters. I did mention there were 2 dogs. One of them is snoring in the background, so hope you enjoy the ASMR. Now I'm going to fill in the dark for the sweater, the burnt umber again, with the mineral spirit, just because I want to cover a little bit faster. It's probably going to drip a little, but that's okay. And I'd say the first 20 minutes is about the worst, to be honest. Once you get past the first 20 minutes, especially in a setup as difficult as painting the mother of a loved one, then it's a little more smooth sailing. And when you're working in this style, I recommend bristle brushes, at least for the umber sketch. When we get into the colors, I'm going to be using more synthetic. Which doesn't, it's not as picky, right? But for the umber sketch, I highly recommend bristle brushes. I like to use Robert Simmons. Of course, I'm not sponsored by anyone, so, you know, I'm telling you exactly how I feel about the brushes. You can turn towards here a little more. Okay. Okay, good. Thank you. So I'm going to go ahead and sit back and squint a little bit. Okay, so now with the dry brush, I'm going to lift a little bit above the eye over here. We're almost ready to get into color, really. I'd say the umber sketch for this purpose has to be about, I don't know, not that accurate, maybe about 80% accuracy. And then I'll get the rest with the color. I'm going to use the alla prima approach for the start. And remember a couple episodes ago, I introduced the fast drying colors. I don't remember what I called that episode. I think I called it Tools for Success or something like that. I'm using Gamblin's Fast Matte Titanium White, which will allow this to be dried and workable. Should I just say workable? In about 24 hours. So hopefully, if I get another sitting, another 3-hour pose with this, I'll be able to continue it on a dry painting tomorrow. But for you, it'll all be in the same episode, so don't worry. So this is the time to really stand back and assess the information that you have. You don't necessarily need to add any more information here. Now the purpose is to make the little information that you have as useful as possible. So I had her forehead a little bit too large and the top of her head a little bit too small. So now I can kind of shrink the forehead a little bit, which will increase this, the size for the hair. Background is also another thing to figure out. The background in this image is fairly complex. I haven't quite resolved what I'll do for the background yet, but it's probably just going to be a standard color. You know, I probably will change my mind eventually. But when you're working from life, spend as much of your time with the model. I wouldn't start off painting the background while you have the model posing for you. Alright, so now, before the timer goes off, it's a good time to mix a flush tone. Hopefully you can see the palette, though if you can't see the palette, sorry. So we're using the fast matte white, yellow ochre, cadmium red, but just a tiny bit of cadmium red, back to the fast matte titanium white. So what you want to do with your first layer, if you know you're going to work on a painting, or you hope you're going to work on a painting for more than one day, you want to start off a little bit lighter and brighter than you normally would if you were going to do just a one-time painting. So a little more of the cadmium red. Hopefully in the future I will switch to all fast matte gambling colors. I really enjoy the fast matte titanium white. It's just helpful to be able to continue to work on a painting day in and day out, as I'm working on my studio paintings pretty much every day that I can. So now with this color, we're going to draw a little bit, and I'm starting off with the brightest light here on the corner of the tear duct. I don't want to jump into too much detail with the eyes just yet, but I am prioritizing the main triangle a little bit, which is the two eyes and the nose, right? And that's because most of the likeness just happens with the main triangle. And just to be practical, as I always say, those of you that have been watching for a while know what I'm going to say. The eyes are the most difficult thing to move. Doesn't mean they can't be moved. I will probably move the eyes at some point, but they're just the most difficult thing to move, and I will avoid that if possible. The nose is the second easiest thing, second hardest thing to move, and then the mouth, and then the chin, and the rest of the face. So that's kind of our little order of operations when it comes to the face. Is that the timer? So that's the timer, and I'm going to give the model a break, and I'll be back in the blink of an eye. And here we are again. So I had to reset the camera angle. So as I mentioned, I knew there'd be some kind of glare, so it looked pretty bad. Anyway, I moved the camera angle, so let's continue with what I was doing. So the red, the fast matte titanium white, cadmium yellow, And again, we're going at this in the alla prima fashion for the beginning, working a little bit lighter than normal, because I hope to work on this one again another time. So now that we have these main lights for the main triangle, I think we're in a good position to jump into the good old color value web. So now let's go ahead and do this. I'm gonna switch brushes here, and dang, this one got kind of messed up in my backpack. But again, these are my favorite brushes, my favorite synthetic mix brushes. Princeton Catalyst Polytip Bristle. Alright, so I'm going to use the Liquin medium. Liquin combined with the Gamblin Fast Matte is awesome. You could use Galkid, which is hopefully I'm showing you some of the mixtures, but anyway. The darkest dark is the Burnt Umber Alizarin Permanent. So where was I? So the Galkid is pretty similar. It's an Alkyd type color, or Alkyd type medium. It's a fast dryer. So you definitely want to use fast drying mediums for the first layer of your painting. I like to use it pretty much in every layer. So again, I apologize if you can't see all of the mixtures for the color value web, but I'll just spell them out. So the darkest dark, which is Burnt Umber, Alizarin Permanent, and Ultramarine Blue. Working my way up, I'm going to use the Cadmium Red and Sap Green together. Contrary to popular belief, red and green don't make poop. They make a very interesting flesh color. So now I'm using a little bit of the cadmium yellow. Now we're approaching the orangey pinkish type of color family as we work our way up the color value web. I don't know why I'm lifting the palette up to show you. I really don't think that the palette is in frame. Again, I apologize. I just have no way of controlling the angle of the camera. So anyway, the cadmium yellow now mixed with the cadmium red. So again, we're getting towards that orangey side as we work our way up the color value web. Remember, to those of you that are new to this channel, the color value web is extremely important when it comes to the organization of your colors on your palette. I cannot stress that enough. Organize your values. Value is the most important thing. Anyone that tells you that value is not the most important thing to making something look realistic, well, ask them to look at a black and white photograph. It looks believable, right? You can tell who the person was. Therefore, value is the most important thing when it comes to trying to get likeness. Alright, so I have kind of like a dark middle tone brush and a light brush. A little bit towards the orangey side just because I'm using that LED light. There is a little bit of influence from the natural light, but I suspect as the daylight starts to go away, then that probably won't be seen as much. So I'm starting off with the side plane of the nose here, and I'm thinking of the structure of the head as if, you know, it were a mannequin, a wig maker's block or mannequin. I can't remember which one of my teachers told me this, but this isn't coming from me, but someone once told me, don't make it too human too soon. Actually, no, I think I got that from the Studio Incominati live stream a long time ago. If you haven't heard of Studio Incominati, check them out on YouTube. And if you're hearing any noise, I put some rice in the rice cooker. In between the breaks, I'm going to be making some sushi rolls. For dinner, because that's what I do. Alright, a half tone here for the side of the eye, for the side of the eye socket. So that's a little bit cold, I think, for the shadow, so I'm going to warm it up a little bit with the cadmium red. For the cast shadow of the nose. The important thing here is the overall structure of the head, especially if you're working in this technique, the alla prima technique. the wet on wet technique. The converse of this would be working in the classical approach, whereas I can paint this in 2 sittings using alla prima approach with fast dryers. I believe that's the fastest way for me to paint. If I were to do this in the full-blown classical approach, you know, I would have to do 1 session for the drawing, so that's 3 hours for the lines. And then I'd have to do another 3-hour session for the underpainting, so that's the second day for the underpainting, the black and white underpainting. And then I'd have to do another one for the local color, which is a 3rd sitting. Then I'd have to do another one for the more advanced colors. We're starting off with the more advanced colors, so this is what's making it go much faster. It is a little bit like the Wild West when it comes to drawing, but after a while you'll learn how to draw with color. So that's a little bit of the halftone there for the bottom of the neck. And remember, this is going to dry and I'm going to go over it again tomorrow, so I'm not that worried about it. So again, I'm going to go back to the darkest dark. I'm going to revisit it. The alizarin permanent burnt umber, ultramarine blue. And from the comments that I read a little while ago, I frequently get asked about the alizarin permanent and why I use alizarin permanent over alizarin crimson, the regular one. It doesn't matter. Don't tell anyone I told you this, but for our purposes, it doesn't really matter. The alizarin crimson, everyone just kind of yells at me when I use it, just because it is it's known to be a fugitive color. So whereas it looks pink, it might change, or sorry, it looks red, and then maybe 200 years from now it'll look pink. To me, it doesn't really matter. I won't be here in 200 years, so it doesn't bother me quite as much. So anyway, now that we have the shadow down, I'm gonna go back into the lighter colors and start to cover a little bit more. So that's the light underneath of the bottom of the nose, side of the philtrum. Now I really need a halftone brush, so I'm gonna switch. So I have a halftone brush, a dark brush, and a light brush. And now there's something I always talk about and introduce as the awkward stage in a painting, in a portrait painting. And again, if you're new to this channel, the awkward stage is just the uncomfortableness we get when we look at an unfinished face. It's scary. It looks like something out of a scary movie. I just finished watching something called the Llorona. I don't know how to say it. But anyway, it's scary to us because we're not used to seeing unfinished faces. We're not used to seeing glimpses, partial glimpses of faces. So that's what kind of creates that psychological uneasiness when you see an unfinished face. So if you start to get nervous in this stage of the painting, you're not alone. I'm pretty nervous myself. That's just the way it goes. Luckily for us though, oil paint is a very forgiving medium. So it takes a couple hours for it to settle with the fast dryers. A lot more than a couple hours if you're not using fast dryers. So it's pretty forgiving. So it allows us to go in, make mistakes, make the corrections, and get on with life. So here's the side plane of the cheekbone. So before I get too complicated with the planes, I'm going to try to keep it as organized as possible. I don't want to introduce 5 or 6 different planes in an area. I want to keep it as workable as I possibly can. Now I'm trying to keep my colors organized, but I keep mixing up my light brush and my middle light brush, so if you mix up your brushes too, it's okay. Remember, keep it like a wig maker's block. Very simple and workable. Now, these are danger zones that I usually address. This little area here. If you can minimize it as much as possible, I just put in a sharp plane change here, and now I'm going to go in with a lighter light. Probably going to go straight titanium white with yellow ochre. So straight titanium white, no, straight titanium white, cadmium yellow. And we can actually put that value here now that I see the proper place for it. And over here, we're going to need a lot more pink. It could just be with the changing lights. I just see a little bit more pink on the cheeks. Cadmium red, titanium white. Probably a little more cadmium red. And we're going to follow through on the other side. Put that here. And remember, this is the most, I'd say this is one of the most awkward stages in the entire painting. When you're just starting to put in the big planes in with the alla prima approach. One of the benefits that the classical approach has is it doesn't really have too much of a awkward stage because it's not that unsettling to see outlines, but when you see values like this, it can be a little more daunting. So just keep that in mind. Again, when you're painting family members, can you turn this way a little bit? Okay, good. So when you're painting family members, loved ones in your home, you want to work fast, so I actually recommend this technique. I wouldn't be showing you a technique that I wouldn't use myself in that given situation. Because in this situation, there's no way on earth that I would be given the 6 different days that I would need to execute a classical portrait. It just wouldn't happen. Timer. We still have 5 minutes. So now, before the timer goes off, I'm cleaning off the dark brush with the mineral spirits. I have a yoga mat underneath me, so make sure when you're working in your home or in someone else's home, as it is with me right now, you want to paint proof the area. If I accidentally get paint on the carpet, I'm dead. Let's just say someone named Sophia will kill me if I get any paint on the carpet. So make sure that you protect the environment in your area, in your home. If you have an expensive carpet, put a yoga mat underneath your surface and you should be okay. So see how I'm drawing with color? I'm finding where the corner of the neck is here. I have quite a nasty glare, but that's alright. See how I'm drawing? As I put in this dark, I start to question how dark my shadow is. I might actually go in and make it darker in a little bit. And now I'm just going to let it blend in with the burnt umber color in the hair. This is why burnt umber is so useful, because it just allows the colors to blend in nicely. So now I'm going to get a lot more color, though I don't want to paint too thick. If you paint too thick, it will make the paint take longer to dry. So in this instance, I don't want the paint to take too long to dry. And again, like a wig maker's block. I'm gonna put in this little halftone. See how I'm mixing up my my colors? Let's clean off this brush. This is supposed to be my light brush, which I'll probably confuse another 50 times. But this is the halftone brush for now. See, there's even tape on the brush. Those of you that have been watching these videos for years, you'll recognize these brushes with the tape, because I would always mix up the brushes as I am now. Just a habit of mine. And remember, this is a live talking, so feel free to keep this video on as you're working in your own studio, or in this case, if you're working at home, you can just keep this video on. I know it's a lot longer than the typical YouTube video. And again, excuse any of the noises that you will hear in the background, as I have no control over that. But that's the fun in this. You're painting at home. A little more light, the side of the cheekbone here. See, I needed a little bit more space there. I didn't see it before. A little bit more of the red. We have just under a minute left. Let me cover this while I still can. Okay, and let's break. Let's break for you. Now we're going to take another break, and I'll be back in the blink of an eye. And now we're back. As I said, I would probably go into the shadow color, which to me appears a little too light. It's very close, at least when I squint my eyes down, it's very close to the value of the hair. Let's go ahead and make this a little bit darker. And as there is some influence of natural light in this setup, the colors of the light will change with respect to the changing daylight. So that's another interesting factor that you'll probably deal with when you're painting a live model at home. One thing I didn't factor, however, is how the light will affect the camera, but I don't think most of us have to worry about filming ourselves painting, so I'll omit that explanation, as I'm still figuring that out myself. I'm going to use the synthetic fan brush just to eliminate some glare and to make some edges a little bit softer. So for the background, I have to be very strategic. I need something that will relate to the flesh colors, but at the same time will dry by tomorrow. I can't go into any of the reds for the background, as the reds are very slow dryers. So I think what I'll do, I'll go with the type of gray for now. I'm pretty much guaranteed that anything with mostly fast matte titanium white will dry. So just tiny bit of ivory black, and let's throw in some burnt umber just to add some warmth to the gray in the background. And burnt umber is another relatively fast drying color, though not as fast drying as say the fast matte titanium white. A little more Liquin will go into the background. The secret is Liquin, and I guess that's the rice cooker for the sushi rice. So the secret is Liquin, fast matte, titanium white. You have those two, you're in a very good place to work day in and day out. And I'm putting in the background color, but at the same time I'm drawing the side of the hair, so the shape of the silhouette of the hair. Now if this were the classical approach, I would spend a lot of time, and don't get me wrong, I love the classical approach for its ease of use. If this were the classical approach, I would have had to draw the silhouette of each one of these shapes, and that's just not, that would just take way too much time to have to draw that out with line. So instead, I'm drawing it with the color and moving much faster. A little bit more of the ivory black. I'm going to make sure to add more Liquin with that. I'm going to add some variety to the background. So as I mentioned earlier, when you're working from life, you want to minimize the time you spend painting the background. So with that, I just make these edges a little softer. And that should be that for the background for now. Don't want to spend too much time with that. So where was I before the break? I was here on the bottom of the neck. So a little bit more of an orangey hue. So the cadmium yellow, cadmium red, a little bit of Liquin. Now we have the bottom of the neck. Pay attention to the shape of the shadows. You want to draw with as much specificity in the alla prima approach as possible. This is not at all as forgiving as a linear drawing transferred to a canvas. This is something you want to nail, just like the TV show Nailed It, which we were all watching last night, which is pretty interesting at season 4. But you want to nail the shadow shapes in the first sitting. Get them as correct as possible. I'm using the halftone brush towards the bottom here. So you want to work lighter and softer and a little cooler if possible with your first layer. Another thing I should probably talk about, since this is painting a portrait from a live model at home, is the distractions when you're painting at home or in someone else's home. See, I have two birds behind me, a cat, sushi rice makers that just went off, and all kinds of distractions. So when you're working in your home or someone else's home, you're gonna have to find that kind of zone. You want to be able to zone out. And for me, zoning out actually helps when I'm talking and painting at the same time. If I weren't talking and painting, then I would probably be a little more distracted. And that's just because I'm so used to talking and painting. I'm just so used to that. I enjoy this much more than the voiceover, even though I know many of you prefer the voiceover. Sorry. I'm gonna go back to the halftone. See how I didn't pay too much attention into the details. The details are the easy part. Everybody's always so impressed with how realistic that eye is, or how realistic the nose is, when the challenge really is in the big shapes. Okay, now for the shirt, I'm gonna have to be very careful with what color I use here too. Since it's kind of a reddish, I guess purple looking color, I'm gonna go into the burnt umber and the alizarin permanent. Thin it like crazy, so a lot of mineral spirits. You can probably tell how much mineral spirits is on it, and the fast matte titanium white. Crossing my fingers that this dries for tomorrow, but if it doesn't, it's not that far off, so I'll be able to adjust it without too many issues. Now I do need to adjust the edge for the shirt. Now she's sitting on a chair. I'm not really going to put the chair in here. Do any of you also have the neighbor with the dog that barks all the time? Just wondering. So what can you do? You gotta work, right? So a little bit more coverage here for the shirt. And I'm kind of going in a scrub, like I'm scrubbing the brush, which I guess isn't that good for the brush, but these brushes can handle it. I'm gonna leave the bottom to vignette pretty much, so I'm gonna worry too much about a fine finish for the bottom. Remember, vignette is just the area that you leave unfinished in a painting to complement the areas that are going to be more finished. In this case, nothing is really finished, everything is even, but the face will be more finished than anything else eventually. So now the the fast matte white, the yellow, and the cat that's trying to eat the bird behind me. Give me a second here. Hey, Deborah, get off. Get off. Okay, so anyway, just trying to make sure the cat doesn't eat my girlfriend's mother's bird. That would be bad. So a little bit more fast matte titanium white, cadmium red. We're gonna go back into these lights. Remember, what did I say at first? Like a wig maker's block. Now I'm adding a little more depth into the concavity of the eye socket on this side. So now I'm going to start to subdivide the shapes within the face even more. So whereas they were grouped into 1, 2, 3 3 values. Now we're going to start to add many more. But still not going to worry too much about specifics. So this is very much a three-dimensional thinking. Titanium white. I'm using a lot of titanium white, fast matte, titanium white, cadmium yellow, cadmium red, and Liquin, very thin. And the eyes, I'm just gonna make a blur, just a blur. I know it's hard to look at at first, but if you can get the structure of the face to look like the model without any of the details will be a piece of cake. In the alla prima approach, it's much harder to put details in a vague type of scaffolding, ambiguous type of structure. You want to have it very structured so that when you put in the small shapes, it all will just kind of fit into place. And if not, they're easy enough to move, that's not a problem. And of course I'm mixing up my brushes. Now this is the corner of the concavity of the eye socket right across the tear duct. And it's right across from the nasion bone. This is the nasion bone, as it has a plane break here with the root of the nose. At this point I do need a little bit of a smaller brush, which I don't have on hand, which is okay. If you use larger brushes, it kind of helps you keep everything much more manageable. Yeah, 4 minutes. As I said before, as this is live talking, I'm not going to, there are some portions where I'm not really going to speak as much. So I said, you know, you can keep this video on as like a studio friend. I'm your studio friend, or just paint along with me. Draw or paint along with me. So I'm going to go right in with the fast matte titanium white, straight fast matte, as you're hopefully seeing here, and a little bit of Liquin, and try and put a glimpse of where the highlight's going to fit Where's the brightest light? I have to squint. It's gonna be on the nose. Somewhere over there. I will probably paint over that eventually, which is okay, but I need to know where the brightest light is gonna be. So back to the cadmium red. See how we're starting to subdivide the nose. Easy does it. It's almost effortless when you're working in this technique. Almost, but it does take effort. Now I want to make sure to use more burnt umber in the darks for the first layer, so this thing dries in 24 hours. So there's a lot of burnt umber in the darker tones. That's probably one of the most common questions I get asked on Instagram, why I use a lot of the brown color. That's just because it dries fast and it's dark. I need a lot of darks that dry fast. Now this is the glabella. I'm going to have to differentiate it with a very clean plane break. It's a very indicative feature of our model. Usually after you've studied the planes of the face for quite a while, you can tell which features are very indicative of the likeness of a given model. For this model, the glabella is a very distinctive shape. It takes on the very, almost like a eagle, like the shape of a bald eagle going in this direction. That's the head of the eagle, that's the wings of the eagle. And that's the timer. So I'll be back in the blink of an eye. And now we're back. So now that we have the large planes of the face, the background and everything, we're going to switch into the smaller colors. So this is going to be the portion in the video where I may do some edits. So if there's changing camera angles or something, or edits, that's because I don't want to, at this point, I don't want to show too much mundane footage, so just be aware of that. I've switched to smaller brushes, and now we're going to start to draw within the smaller portions of the features. And remember, when you're working from the live model, it's okay to have some doubts about the overall look of the painting at this stage. Remember, the important thing is to get the big shapes in place first, and don't worry too much about the finesse or the details. See how I'm starting to work my way into the smaller shapes? Just had to check my autofocus on the camera there, so we should be good. But see how I'm starting to carve into the smaller shapes, and you can see where the eyes will eventually fit. And as I said before, the awkward stage is just something we have to work around. So now with the same brush, though you probably won't be able to see it, off camera, I'm just mixing black and white. So let's see if I can show you here. Black and white, that's what this is. A little bit of flesh tone. Black and white, a little bit of flesh tone is what I'll use for the sclera. Remember, the sclera is the white of the eye, and remember that the sclera is not white. It's usually some type of halftone. Now going in with the sclera. And the sclera is usually the first glimpse of hope when it comes to the features starting to come into place here. The drawing is still very much workable at this stage. It's going to give me some freedom to move the eyes around if I need to. In this stage, I don't really think I need to move it too much. So a little bit of light on this side. Now you have to decide at this point, and you have to be very careful about the distance between the eyes from tear duct to tear duct. And actually, was kind of dumb. I left some of my best brushes in the studio, so I'm gonna be kind of just using the same small liner brush for these placements. I usually have, I think, about 3 of these brushes, but right now I only have 1. But in any case, I'm gonna lock in the position of the tear ducts, still focusing on the placement of the distance between the eyes. So from here to here, very careful. This is where you can mess up the painting really bad. And you can return from this. It is possible, but it's hard. So you want to be very careful about the placement. And I think that they are just about where they need to be. It could be that perhaps I'm going to move this one over that way a little bit. Now when you're working from the live model, especially when the model is at a distance away from you, there's no way you can just go up to the model and measure. Unless you go up to the model with a caliper, but that could be kind of intimidating. So this is why I always emphasize when you're working from when you're working from photo reference, I always emphasize to use your eye to gauge the position of the proportions. Use your eye to gauge the proportions. That is because when you find yourself in a situation like I am here, I can't just go up to the model and measure. It's just not something I can do. So I need to trust my eye. I need to trust my instincts in order to get the proper distance and placement for the eyes. So now I'm putting in the upper eyelid, the plane break for the upper eyelid. Now it's going to be very tempting to go in and try to put in every little detail for the eyes, but I just want the sclera and the iris right now and some shapes around it. Now our model has hazel eyes, so I'm using a light brown for now. And this is the careful part. Now I've been redirecting her and telling her to look in this direction. Oh, can you turn away? Okay, good. So you want to make sure that you put your foot down on where you want the model to be looking. And as I put this shape in, I notice I might have too much for the forehead, and that's okay. As long as you lock in the eyes, you can easily move anything else according to them. But the converse is usually not that easy. And now with the same brush, we're just going to sketch in a few little halftones, letting the paint mix with the color that's on the canvas. Here we're sketching little halftones for the bottom of the eye and for the side. Putting in some of these form overlaps. So those of you that have been watching for a while know what AKA form overlaps mean. That's what I'm putting in right now. A little bit of the cadmium red for the pinkish area over here of the eye. Back to the brownish color. Form overlap for the side of the eye here. And now, before I forget, I'm going to go back to the hairline, move it down. And when I move it down, I'm going to have to adjust the color for the shape for the background. Luckily, I left the background brush, so I shouldn't have to do too much mixing. So I think moving the forehead down to about there. Now I'll switch to the background brush. Luckily, it still has some paint on it. Move this down, squinting. That should be good for that. And now we're going to work our way down towards the nose. I'm going to start off with the burnt umber, the darker darks on the color value web. Starting off with the nostril here, relating it to the tear duct. You want to relate these two areas together. Now this is the part that takes a lot of precision. If you can put the accents in the right spot relative to one another, then you should get the likeness. Sometimes it takes a few tries. So don't quit if you find yourself at this stage and you put the accents in the wrong spot. But as I was saying before, it usually helps to have this structure down. I have it a little long here, and I'm aware of that, but I have these structures that will allow me to build on top of them and make corrections. So I'm not that worried about the specifics. It's a lot easier to catch a mistake working in this approach than it is in the classical. Because in the classical, at this point, all you have are lines. Here, we're moving the lines around relative to the shapes that we already placed. It is a little harder to gauge, I'm not going to lie, but it's so much faster. So now with the same brush, as I said, I usually have many of this same brush, but today I only have one. I'm going to put in the light underneath the nose, and I'm not going to have too many shapes, too many values, that is, per feature, but I want to have just enough so that the features read. And tomorrow I'll go in and make them much more refined. So as I was saying, there will be a lot of edits, or some edits, once I get past this point. Cleaning the brush a little bit. Now I'm going to go in with the highlight, which I'm just going to use straight up like 99% of the fast matte titanium white, just a tiny bit of cadmium yellow. That'll definitely be touch dry by tomorrow. And there are some highlights for the eyes, so I can put them in now at this point. Though I will put much more information later, but this helps me gauge where everything is eventually going to fit. Now we're going to walk our way down towards the philtrum. make sure that this plane break is very indicative of the distance between the bottom of the nose and the top middle portion of the upper lip. This is another feature that's very, it's a very telltale sign of our model. This is a very, like I was saying with the glabella, this is also a very distinctive feature on our model. So any feature that you can determine to be distinctive for your model is going to be very helpful in getting a likeness. So now we're going to put in the light for the philtrum. It's a very refined philtrum. Now, as we move our way towards the mouth, I'm going to use the same brush, a little bit of alizarin permanent and burnt umber, and I think just those two, in the darker middle portion of the color value web. And I usually start with the color of the lips to draw in the placement of the upper lip. And I start off with the upper lip because it's easier to gauge the center line and the center line and the angle. So center is here. The angle is somewhat like this. So we have 5 minutes till the break. So just a brush stroke for one corner of the mouth, and another brush stroke for the other. And with the corners of the mouth, you want to relate it to the corner of the nose. So a little bit further out, so right about here should work without too much confusion. Now for the lower lip, I'm going to use, again, the same brush and just a pinkish color, the alizarin permanent, the titanium white, burnt umber. And as we start to enter in another stage in the painting, every time you enter a new stage in the painting, you enter into another awkward stage. So now, just like just like a adolescent getting to know what it's like to be an adult, or getting used to being an adult, we're now getting kind of used to what the painting looks like in a different stage. So it will evolve from one stage to the next and introduce an uncomfortableness in each stage. But don't worry. You will be able to pull it all together once you have worked your way up into the smaller shapes. See, if you were painting an apple or a vase, a landscape or something like that, yeah, it would be much more forgiving if you placed the stem of the apple in a little too far to the left, a little too far to the right, or if you forgot to put a tree or something in your landscape. But with portrait, no way. It's nowhere near as forgiving. So you have to approach it with precision and with a strategy. So this is our strategy. And our model's eyebrows are actually very distinctive. they angle up a lot more than what I'm used to, which is a good thing. It'll also help with the likeness. I'm currently working on a triple portrait of my girlfriend, her mother, whom we're painting here, and her sister. So, you know, every kind of study that I can do, like a smaller painting like this, will help me in those larger paintings. So if you're working on multiple portraits, it doesn't hurt to do smaller portraits, even if it's not in the same lighting situation. Smaller portraits of the models that are in your larger compositions. And if you want to see those paintings that I'm talking about, feel free to check out my Instagram account. That's where I post my studio work. Although that painting will probably take a couple months, I think, to finish. In any case, we have, I think, about a minute. Yep, a minute till the break. And again, the upper lip could still use a little more of a triangular shape here. So just before the timer goes off, or the battery dies, whichever comes first. Okay, so now we're going to take a break and I'll be right back. And we're back. So now what I'm going to do is go into each one of those shapes just like I did in the previous 20-minute interval, but I'm going to put much more refinement in the shapes, not so much in color but in structure, in terms of their relative values and shapes. That doesn't make sense. So the angle for the partition of the hair, you know, even something as minute as that, I still take a lot of care with. I realize the camera is at the same angle as my hand, and seeing as how I can't really paint left-handed as well as I can paint right-handed, I apologize if my hand has been blocking any of the angles, but yeah, what can I do? So with this 20-minute interval and the other ones, I'm going to now introduce cuts. So I'm going to probably show you maybe, I don't know, a couple minutes of real-time footage of this 20-minute sitting, and then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna do a cut, just so the episode doesn't end up being however long this is gonna be, 4 hours or something, just to save me some space on my computer and such. So yeah, right now what I'm doing is introducing smaller shapes, still focused on structure with each one of the areas. See the bottom of the lower eyelid, we're introducing a little bit of a form overlap. Can you turn towards here a little more? This way, not towards this. Okay, good, thank you. Still introducing some structural aspects of the bottom of the lower eyelid, and I'm going to approach each of the other features with the same amount of specificity. I'm going to be much more careful now when it comes to, well, once I can find my brush, I'm going to be much more careful with the edge quality around the features. I don't want to put any sharp edges where they don't need to be. That's the number one, I think, biggest mistake I can do in this stage, is to introduce too many sharp edges. Now I am missing a brush. Okay, never mind. It's gone. Oh, found it. It also pays to be organized when you're working from a live model, especially in someone else's house. I try to be organized, but anyway. Alright, so since now you've seen what I've done with this eye, and I'm going to continue to develop this eye, now I think it's a good time to introduce a little editing cut. So now I'm going to go ahead and shut the camera off for a little bit. With the last 20 minutes, I'm going to just put a little more structure on the face, still heavily focusing on the face as that is the primary focal point for this painting. As I did with the last 20-minute interval, I'm going to introduce a edit in a little bit. So I'm going to show you how I make this edge softer. Again, I'm going into the color value web. Remember, it's important to have organization on the palette so that when you go in and make modifications to very subtle value transitions on your paintings, you're able to keep those values organized. So yeah, this shape was glaring at me a little too much, so I think I actually have to pull this over a little more, which is not that difficult to do, as long as the structure for this area here, this is the structure of the orbicularis oris. I want to make sure that this structure is indicative of our model and not too much of a generalization. So this is how we're kind of going from general to specific now. And I'm giving each shape the same amount of refinement within the face. I'm not focusing too much on one individual part just yet. That'll be for the next day that I'll work on this painting. So the strategy with this painting is that the first day was intended to draw and introduce color, which we did, and you know, set up the major drawing information so that the next day, so tomorrow for me, which is a couple minutes for you, or maybe a little more for you, you're gonna see how I refine this image and make it much more naturalistic. So now that you've seen how I moved the mouth a little bit, I think we're going to get into the cut very soon. You want to search for rhythms within the portrait. So I'm looking at a rhythm here, how this angle shoots up. I know I have to clip my nails. How this angle shoots up towards the side of the nose, the wing of the nose. See this? Shoots up towards the wing of the nose. So you want to look for inner relationships within your shapes like that, instead of you know, vaguely trying to trace outlines onto it. So see this rhythm? It shoots up towards there. And what I'll probably do from here is now just with the same amount of attention, just keep moving all throughout the face. So now let's do a little cut. Alright, so we're back. There's 1 minute left in the last 20-minute pose of the day for me. I realized I probably did a cut, hopefully I caught it, where I painted this necklace. I didn't realize it was off camera until I just zoomed out. So yeah, I painted in a necklace here. So just with white and ochre, right now I'm just going to put in a little shadow shape for it. Well, it's a little too dark, so a little lighter. And again, I'm using fast drying colors. So this will be dry by tomorrow, so I can continue to develop this painting and hopefully finish it by tomorrow. But as you see here, I did a lot of the heavy work in terms of drawing and putting in structures for the face. So in the next sitting, the next day, I'll be able to go in and put further refinement on the face, along with putting in more colors in the background. Okay, that's the timer. Thank you so much. Alright, so hopefully I will be able to continue this painting tomorrow. So tomorrow will be a couple seconds for you. So this will hopefully be dry, 24 hours for us to continue. So here we are back in the second day. So this is about 24 hours later. As you can see, I can run my hands across the painting, play the drums with the painting, and nothing is coming off. So that is the joy of using Gamblin's Fast Matte. I know you can't, it's not focused on it, but whatever. Gamblin's Fast Matte and Liquin. See? Play the drums with your hands on the painting. Smack the painting. Nothing comes off. So that is the joy of that. So I've already pre-mixed the color value web, just like I explained, hopefully I explained yesterday. So now I'm going to continue to develop the painting. I'm going to start off in the middle tones, just like I was working before. And another nice thing about the Gamblin Fast Matte is that it doesn't dry, or it doesn't sink in. If you notice, the colors didn't sink in as much. That also really depends on how you use your mediums. If you overuse your medium, the colors are more likely to sink in, so just be aware of that. So now, with today's session, I'm going to be developing the forms of the face with much more specificity. I'm going to hyper focus in smaller individual areas. So I'm going to start off here with this eye. And the smaller form overlaps, so hopefully you can see the color value web as I'm mixing here. It's going to be a little bit darker here, and I have to relate each one of these values to one another. And if I overdo any one area, so if I overdo this, it's going to look like she has a black eye and like somebody smacked her upside the face. So I have to be very careful with how I relate these values to one another. This is a very easy part to mess up. So you have to constantly stand back and relate each shape to one another. And just like in yesterday's footage, since a lot of this is going to be repetitive and dare I say monotonous, repeating the same kind of stuff over and over, I'm going to show you some footage of each 20-minute interval, and then I'll do some edits in between. In yesterday's footage, as I went through it, some of the audio did get messed up, so I apologize for that. So you've probably already seen many of the edits. Whereas this was intended to be a couple hour episode, it's probably going to be just under an hour after edits. So I'm pushing the light here for the tear duct. So again, I'm building the painting just like I was before we ended the session yesterday. That is the true beauty of working with this color setup. And now, hopefully, you'll be able to see. Who can guess what I'm doing now? Black and white. I hope you can see it on the camera. You know what? Let me adjust the camera shot. There we go. Now you can. Now I know what you're seeing. So there you can see mixing black and white. Should have done this yesterday. So black and white, some flesh tone. Does anyone remember what this is? If you mention the sclera, then you're absolutely right. So I'm now going to go and put in some halftones in the sclera. So over here it's a little bit darker. And with the sclera, you want to aim towards cooler, towards the bluish side. You don't want to give your model pink eye. If your model has pink eye, that's okay. You can paint the pink eye as you see it. But typically you want to watch out for pink and yellow. Those are two no-nos when it comes to the white of the eye. And green, I would watch out for green. That would just be interesting to say. But no, we're not going to paint the sclera green. And there's a lot of daylight showing through, and I believe it's reflecting in the sclera as you're seeing here. I know that angle is really intense. I can't really do much about that really. The closer I move the camera to myself, see my shoulder is like right here. I'm gonna just zoom you in. So the closer I move into the camera, the worse off the camera angle will be. And remember, today's episode is about painting a live model at home and dealing with all of the difficulties in that. As long as you're not painting and talking like I am, it shouldn't be that different than working in a typical studio setting. So let's see, now the next thing I want to do is continue to push some of the, dare I say, details, but you know I hate the word detail. So I'm going to put in some more information for the iris of the eye. Our model does have hazel eyes, so that's going to be an important factor in the development of this painting. So that's mainly, let's see if you can see over here, that's mainly yellow ochre. I know it's not in focus, I'm sorry. Yellow ochre and some of the burnt umber and sap green to get you that hazel eye type color. And I'm going to leave the dark of the eye that I already had here for the pupil of the eye, so I don't end up having to do any extra work. Now, as I move along in the painting, I want to continue to expand on the value range, though it's probably very difficult to see on the camera. I still have a couple more steps. Let's see if you can see here. I know it's not in focus, but we'll do what we can do. See here, I'm going to stick to this value, not this one, but this one. So we can go just one step down. It looks a lot darker than it is relative to the other colors. And I'm going to stick to that with the eye, the side of the eye. Another thing you typically want to do when you're addressing a painting in the second sitting, or just when you're starting another sitting on your painting, look for any mistakes. So right after I put in this halftone, I'm going to stand back and see if there's any prominent mistakes. So I'm going to first check the center line, make sure that everything is aligned with the center line. So it seems like the eyes, the nose, and the mouth are pretty much aligned with the center line. You do not need the model for this. You just want to make sure that the proportions, or each one of the features, excuse me, are aligned with your center line. So hopefully you can see the eyes are aligned with the center line. Nothing is out of perspective. So this is the axis for the eyes. Let me move my hand so you can see the nose. The mouth. The mouth is the closest thing to being slightly off axis. That also kind of depends on individual models and expressions. As you remember the quote from John Singer Sargent, a portrait is a painting in which there's a little something wrong with the mouth. So if the mouth is the area that's giving you trouble, that's a good place to be. Because if it's the eyes that's giving you trouble, that's a whole different story. That's going to be much harder to deal with. Not impossible, but much harder. Alright, now we have nice curvature for the sclera of the eye. So let's address the thing with the mouth. So really all I can do is just move this point up or this point down. That's a little bit of a dilemma. I'd say, I think I'm going to move this up. So, in the darker region of the color value web, sorry it's not in focus, but I have it on autofocus. There's nothing I can do about that. So anyway, see how we're gonna move this line? I call these projections. So I'm projecting this line up. And the beauty of working wet on dry, because now we're actually working wet on dry, is that if I don't like the change that I made, just get paper towel and just wipe it off. It won't ever get to 100% of how it was, but see, it's not that difficult to project the line up. And then, of course, I'm going to have to move all of the other stuff according to this projection. So I'm going to move this shape up. And remember, yesterday I mentioned, probably more than I should, I mentioned a lot about how the details are the easy part. The details are not that impressive. You know, somebody looks at a painting or one of my paintings and they're like, look at all those details. I'm usually somewhat offended because I try to think about structure as much as possible. I don't really, dare I say, care too much about detail because that's just really something that can be added on. See how that's not a big deal to move. What is a big deal is to get it to fit within the parameter of the big shape of the head. That's the challenge. Now I do see some major color variations that I'm going to want to push. In particular in today, well, I guess this is the last sitting. So in this sitting, in particular, there's so much more color and structure going on around the cheekbones that I just didn't quite get to yet. So let me show you my mindset, or talk to you about my mindset in trying to get those color relationships. So I don't really recommend learning color relationships on a portrait, especially one as difficult as painting a family member or loved one. That's, like I mentioned yesterday, this is the most difficult situation you could put me in. But for color relationships, the best way I find to practice it is through still life. Set up white blocks or matte colored blocks in sunlight and study how the color, say in the shadow, relates to the color, say in the light. So I see that this can get a little bit closer to the bluish side, Now that's not really something that you can see too well with a camera. Even the most expensive camera, you know, the kind of cameras that they use for the Marvel movies and things like that, you know, those are more meant for cinematographic feel. Those are meant for those movies. But when it comes to color relationships in nature, the best thing you can do is study simple still life objects in various color light conditions, so you can describe how the color describes the light. So I'm seeing a much cooler shadow, kind of bluish, but it's not as blue as, say, sky blue. It's not like ultramarine blue. But what happens when you see a warm shadow like this, it usually means that there's a cool light. Usually, okay, quote unquote usually, means that there's a cool light influence, and there's a window open. There's like a window over there off camera, a window behind. So there's a lot of cool light influencing what's going on here. And that's okay. I do have multiple light sources, so that's just something I have to deal with. And now it gets a little darker here. So we're kind of pushing the contrast a little bit. Darker here, but still not as dark as that. Now we're walking a fine line with these values and these color relationships. And of course it gets lighter and a little more pink over here. Now those of you that have been following the channel for a while will notice that I omitted a step in the continuation of this painting. So usually what you would have seen me do in the past was to oil out the painting, to put medium over top of it, to kind of act as a kind of like a couch or something to rest the new layer of paint on. But lately I haven't been using the oil out technique, and that's just because my colors don't sink in quite as much anymore with this new setup, which is a great thing. Classically, you want to oil out only when you need to. So the less we can do that, the better for the painting, and the better for the art conservationists in the future. If this painting survives hundreds of years in the future, it'll be much easier for art conservationists to restore it without having too many layers of oil in between. So this is kind of like a blending brush, really, just using to mix. So I got about a minute on the clock, so I'm going to just continue this 20-minute shot, and then suppose in the next 20-minute interval, that's when I'll do the edit. I get that blending brush. Trying to keep my hand to the left so I don't block too much footage from you. Last thing I'll do before the timer goes off is just throw in the darkest dark, just just to have a reference. If anything did sink in, it's probably the darker darks. I'll stop that. So that's the break. Alright, so now I'm going to take a little short model break, and then we'll return in the blink of an eye. And we're back. So what I'm thinking now with the painting is I have quite a lot of work cut out for me. So again, I'm going to stick with the eyes a little bit longer. Maybe I'll do a minute or two on camera right now, but I'll switch the camera off and do a little edit shortly so I can paint a little faster. So there's a little bit of kind of a reddish, almost purplish color underneath here, and that's just kind of like the top plane of her lower eyelid. Minuscule, but still important. Now I'm going to follow through on the other side. Gotta be very careful with which colors I use. If I make this too red, it's gonna look like her eyes are bleeding. So I have to be very careful with the chroma, or the saturation of each one of these colors. Alright, so we're going to do our little edit now. And we're back. As you can see, I put in some more information for the face. Again, I apologize for the severe angle that the camera is in, but that's just the way it has to be for this. So now we're going to go back into the background. So I'm going to use a kind of greenish gray, like the color that you're seeing there. Maybe a little bit darker. So ivory black, the titanium white, sap green, a little bit of medium, and let's see how this color turns out. So I'm trying to make it as similar as I can to that, but a little bit darker. I'm gonna put a little more influence of that greenish color, so throw in a little more sap green into the mixture there. I know my arm is blocking the footage, but what can you do? What is that? You want me to paint with my left hand? I can do that. So now I'm just trying to cover the silhouette of the hair for now, because I'm going to use the background color to help to draw the hair. So again, I'm going to cover the top a little bit, and a little bit of the sap green. So just moving the hair down a little bit. So I had a little too much showing for the top of the head. That's a little more believable. And that'll be it for that. I don't want to spend too much time with the hair. So now what I'm gonna do, or sorry, I don't want to spend too much time with the background. I really want to get into the hair. So now what I'm going to do is start with the darker areas. So I know you can't really, it can't focus on the palette, but you're seeing what I have in terms of the value, something that's pretty dark. So burnt umber, alizarin permanent, and ivory black type family, starting off with the darker darks. Hair can be a little bit tricky if you don't treat it like planes and colors. So we're going to treat it like planes and colors. So starting off with the darker planes, that's the strategy for the hair here. And then we're going to go over top. And before I forget, let's throw in that earring. So a little bit of burnt umber and some mineral spirits. And we'll put in the bottom of the earring. Now in the image that you have, there may or may not be an earring present. That all depends on how the photograph was taken. So, but don't worry, the earring is only going to take a few brush strokes. Just a light portion of the earring. Now we'll throw in a highlight and call it a day for the earring. So that'll be that for the earring on that side. It wouldn't make sense if we didn't have at least an indication of another earring way back in the distance here. Something like that. Doesn't need to be too descriptive. So now with the darker accents of the hair, or the darker planes covered, now we're going to switch into the next lightest planes. So a little yellow ochre. I'll try not to speak so loud, as I heard that's not a good thing right now. So making this a little bit darker, covering this darker area. Now I'm going to go in wet on wet with a different color. As you're seeing here, the secret to the light in the brownish type of hair is to use flesh tone. Now if I go too cold with the hair, it's going to look like I put a bunch of gray hairs, which isn't a bad thing, but it's not really present right now. And just like you're seeing up there, that's how I'm going to build more of the structure for the hair. Might have went too light there. And I'm trying to stick with sap green, alizarin permanent for these darks, but not as dark as this accent. Switching back to the light brush. There is a little bit of overlap with the hair, which I think is more, realistic than to have none of the hair overlapping. So let's go ahead and do that. I know my hand is blocking, and I know you're hearing background noise, but that's just life. Here, I'm going in with my left hand just for you. Now we're going to switch to the light. So we want some lighter accents for the hair. One over here. Gotta keep your hand very steady. Even if you're painting with your other hand like me, you have to keep your arm steady. For those of you that are interested in random facts about me, I was actually left-handed in school, and I decided to switch to using my right hand when I was, I don't remember, kindergarten or something like that, when they didn't have scissors for right-handed people. So I would actually take notes in class with my left hand. So yeah, just a little, I don't know, little fun fact. I guess you can call it ambidextrous, but I'm not as proficient with my left hand. I'm not completely ambidextrous. I'm just trying to use my left hand so I don't block the footage for you too much. Because with the hair, pretty much every brush stroke that lands is going to stay. Now we're going to switch back to the brush that I used for the background, unless I confused them. I think I confused them. So I'm going to remix the color for the background. Remember, titanium white, ivory black, sap green, and our medium, the Liquin. It's got a little halo effect there, but that's all good. That's actually the paint. There's some dry paint from the Fast Matte titanium white that dried on the palette overnight, which is an interesting effect. It gave us a little bit of a glow. So I want the edge work for the hair to be just as studied as the edge work for all the areas surrounding the hair. Meaning I don't want to have too many same edges. So I don't want too many edges to be similar or overly similar. I'll switch back to the light brush for the hair. We're pulling out some highlights for the hair. Very soft edges. That's what we want for the hair. Almost imperceptible. And there's some of the hair. Actually, I'm mixing up the brushes now. Okay, so this is the background brush. I'm gonna put this brush away. Let's go back to the dark brush. Sap green, burnt umber, ivory black. And remember, we were over here painting some of the hair that's overlapping down here. Gotta be careful not to completely eliminate the earring. Now, especially for those of you that are doing portrait commissions or hope to paint portrait commissions in the future, I would always suggest to do the hair last. Make sure that you have some kind of structure that you, some kind of understandable structure for the face before you go in with the hair. So if I don't like something, if I didn't like this, I could easily go in and subtract with paper towel. I won't get back 100% of what I covered, but I'll get enough back to go over it again. So it's not a big loss. But if I were trying to do the hair at the same time that I started to paint the face, I would run into some problems if I needed to backtrack. So now that we have the hair mostly covered, I'm going to now consider what I'm going to do with the clothing. So the setup did change a little bit from last time, but here's the thing: when you're working from a live model, things change because life is all about change, right? I kind of enjoy the look that it has today, so I'm going to chase the look that it has today. I'm going to use the ivory black, the alizarin permanent, for the darker accents for this part of the clothing. So starting off with the darker parts of the clothing, and I just think it's more interesting to have more stuff, so to speak, in your paintings, especially for portrait commissions. When you're doing portrait commissions, you want to have a lot of variety in the clothing, a little more than the typical portrait study. So I'm going to use a little more of the flesh tone here. I'm putting in a shadow very similar to the color of the shirt that we had before, but a little more greenish. And that kind of greenish will provide a nice color harmony. A nice little cast shadow that we're putting there. And now we'll change brushes to the dark brush and a little bit of, let's see if you can see here, cadmium red. It's kind of purplish, so I guess cadmium red and ultramarine blue. Mostly cadmium red. If I wanted to make it more chromatic of a purple, then I would have used the alizarin instead of the cadmium red, but I don't want it to be as drastic. I don't want it to be as saturated of a color. Now I'm going to go in with the ivory black, burnt umber. I'm going to start to put in some little darker shapes here for the shirt. Very careful not to go over the clover that we painted yesterday. So just leaving a little bit of the clover left. That clover is going to be painted in the blink of an eye. Just a few little brush strokes here and there for that, as time permits. Softer edge. Leaving some brush strokes to show through to allow a vignette. And here we'll put a cast shadow, so this makes a little more sense. Remember, a cast shadow is casted from something. So in this case, this shadow here is being casted from her head onto her shoulders. Make sure to keep those edges soft where they need to be. And now I'm going to put a little more cadmium red onto this brush. Now clearly I'm not going to paint the color exactly as I see it, although on the screen it actually looks exact, but it doesn't need to be perfectly exact as long as I get the values to work. Then we'll have a believable image in space. And I am going to leave a little bit of the bottom to vignette. So we'll leave some brush strokes down here to show through, because that's a neat look. A few more little dark accents for the clothing. And this shadow will help to indicate this little element of drapery. Now what's really missing is the darker darks again. So it seems that the paint is starting to settle, which is good. It's just part of having a fast drying setup. So with the same brush, Azure Black, Ultramarine Blue, we're now going to start to put in those really nice and dark accents. We're going to be careful with the edges. I'm going to keep this edge a little bit softer. I'm just going to use my finger to kind of modulate the edge. Now, I don't want to make it too choppy. So if it's too choppy, then it's going to look like mice were chewing at the corner of the edge. And that's not what we want. We want a nice and uniform edge. So Ivory Black, Alizarin Permanent. And now we've got our darker accent. Slap that dark accent in there. And we have much more space now in the painting. And with just a minute left in the timer, I'm going to sit back and see if there's anything else I want to do with the hair. And it's pretty much just down to finesse with the hair. So the next 20-minute interval will be the last. So I'm going to do an edit with the next one. And the next one will be just to go and kind of look for any troublesome areas that are fixable in a 20-minute interval before calling this painting done. This is a little more of an abbreviated portrait than my studio paintings that you'll see on my Instagram, but it still has a lot more to it than the typical YouTube demo that I do. Okay, you can take a break. Before I start with the last 20-minute pose with our model, I'm going to explain a little bit about my thought process in the end of a painting, since I'm often asked this. So especially when you're working from a live model, you want to prioritize your problem solving. In 20 minutes, I cannot make any major changes to the painting anymore. So really the last things that I will focus on in the final 20 minutes are edges, because everything is still wet, so I can adjust edges quite easily. And the last piece of jewelry down here, the little clover. So I'll most likely show some footage of me painting that little clover down there. Maybe not the entire thing, since that would be kind of boring. But yeah, that's my thought process. The last 20 minutes is just for me to adjust edges around the face. Not to move anything, no major changes, but just edge work, jewelry, maybe some of the brush strokes in the background, though I kind of like the way the background looks like this. And yeah, let's finish this. And another thing I forgot to mention is I use my phone, so I look at the painting through my phone, or in this case, the screen on my camera. I make sure that it looks decent for photography, as these days everything is on Instagram and Facebook and YouTube and all that stuff. So I want to make sure that it looks decent through a computer screen as well before finishing. So I'm going to pick a few more edges to change before calling it a day. Now this edge here is going to bother me, so I'm going to now mix a color in between this color and this color to adjust the edge. And now that I have an intermediate value in color, I'm gonna get some paper towel, dry paper towel, roll it up to a point. Just make the edge very soft. So now we have a nicer looking edge. Still not perfect, but I'm not going to stress out about the look of it. Now I'm just going to take a second to consider the background. I think that this, I can minimize that scratchy look. Just make it a little softer. Still leaving some brush marks there. I do enjoy the way it looks at the top, so I'll leave the top alone. Make this a little softer. So remember, this painting was intended again to give you a tutorial on how to paint live portrait at home. Now if you want to see more of my finished work, more of my studio work, I have links to my Instagram page down below. Remember, this is a little more refined than my usual YouTube video, but this is nowhere near the caliber of my studio paintings that you'll see on my Instagram. So if I were to take this further, I would work on it several more days, so I'm just telling you what I would do. If I were to continue this painting, I would work on it several more days, just like you see on my Instagram account. But in any case, I really hope that this demonstration helps you out. I wish you the best in all of your artwork, and I'll see you on the next one. And it's now time for our new patron shout outs. So thank you so much, Shirley West. Thank you so much, Dave Robinson. Thank you so much to the both of you and to the rest of my Patreon supporters. Your support means the world to me. It helps me out so much. I hope you have a wonderful week, and I'll see you on the next one.